Hi guys, our word today is pessimism. It pertains to something negative or expecting the worst situation. For example, despite the chaotic world, do not let pessimism consume you. Hope is always present. Before we go to the meat of the matter, I want you to think about this. Have you done any of these lately, like clicking or clicked a Facebook react button on someone's post, or perhaps you've posted a comment on a certain news article, or even wrote about the film that changed your perspective? These are ways of expressing our reactions, our feelings about certain materials, and we do them most of the time. And it is normal. To make it even more substantial, we may channel these feelings, reactions, and even evaluations through writing a reaction and a critique. So that's right, we are going to talk about the reaction and critique paper. Let's know what a critique first is. So it is a kind of academic and professional writing that entails passing judgment on a subject matter by evaluating it against a predetermined set of criteria in order to ascertain its overall worth. And in order to do this, basically, it really requires some sort of critical reading and critical thinking. So again, I'd like to emphasize it involves giving evaluation or judgment based on a set criteria, and it is most of the time objective. That is a critique. Let's go to the reaction paper. This is one of the most common writing assignments, not only in English, but across other subject areas. So this one, it's a style of writing in which the author shares his or her thoughts and opinions regarding anything read or observed. So reaction papers are common because we are usually asked to give one on a book we've read, a movie watched, or a food tasted. So while reaction paper also evaluates something, Mishano and Mishano in 2016 adds that a reaction paper is more personal and that the writer talks about his or her feelings about something. It is like a critique, but more subjective as it allows students to talk about how a particular work affected him or her. That's why, for example, a reaction paper out of a movie you watch. So you are allowed there to talk how the movie made you feel, the most exciting parts, which parts made you sad, or which parts made you realize something. What is common among these two types of papers is that they use also formal academic writing style and have a formal structure. So just like our essay structure, we have the intro, body, and conclusion, and it may evaluate the impact of a work in a particular field. Now, when we write a critique, especially one for literary criticism, we might be able to have different takes or angles in approaching the material, and we call them critical approaches to criticism. For example, when we read certain novels or watch films, we can think of different grounds or bases giving our critique a solid foundation. Here are some of the common examples of critical approaches. We have formalism, feminism, reader response, Marxism, psychological criticism, and eco-criticism. So now these approaches, they focus on certain angles or certain aspects of the film or novel. And that is where you focus when you evaluate the material. The first approach is formalism. So this approach claims that literary works contain intrinsic properties, so within the work, and treats each work as a distinct work of art. It also posits that the key to understanding a text is through the text itself. For example, this poem Trees by Joyce Kilmer could be critically evaluated through its form. Formalism focuses on the form and structure, hence the name. So when you evaluate a material using this approach, we look into the literary devices, the imagery, the figures of speech, the number of stanzas or lines, or if it is an essay or a story, the number of paragraphs, the rhyme scheme, the choice of words, and how altogether these literary devices or these forms and structures contribute to make the material aesthetic. Okay, so when we say aesthetic, it is about appreciation of beauty or beauty itself. Okay, so again, formalism, it focuses on how the material was created. For example, the sounds, the diction, the imagery. What do you see when you read the material? What images are created? All right, so form. We look into the form, formalism. The second one is feminism, or we also call it the feminist criticism. So it focuses on how literature presents women as subjects of socio-political, psychological, and economic oppression. It also reveals how aspects of our culture are patriarchal. So patriarchal in UCSB perhaps might be discussed. It is where our culture is oftenly under the rule of men. So patriarchal society. The common aspects looked into this when using feminism are how culture determines gender, how gender equality or the lack of it is presented in the text. Another is how gender issues are presented in literary works and other aspects of human production and daily life. How women are socially, politically, psychologically oppressed by patriarchy, and how this patriarchal ideology is an overpowering presence. Example of a literary work which might be critically evaluated with the use of feminism is The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. So this story uses this approach because here it tackles the struggles that women face in their marriages, especially in the 1800s. So here, if you have time, you may read this story or search for it, and you will realize how this woman is actually seeking for freedom inside the marriage. The next one is reader response. So it is concerned with the reviewer's reaction as an audience of work, and it claims that the reader's role cannot be separated from the understanding of the work. It means that we as readers are therefore not passive and distant, but we are active consumers of the material presented to us. Okay, so it's like the text is meaningless unless we will read it. So the common aspects look into this when using the reader response criticism are the following. So the interaction between the reader and the text in creating meaning, because the meaning comes from us, the readers. And also, we have here the impact of the reader's delivery of sounds and visuals on enhancing and changing the meaning. Okay, so we have text, reader, author. They must all together, they must go together, because if it's just a text without someone reading it, it would be meaningless. That is reader response. And actually for reader response, you can easily use this when you try to critique especially a literary work, novels and short stories. Another approach to literary criticism is the Marxist criticism. So this one is concerned with differences between economic classes and implications of a capitalist. So, or the capitalist system, such as continuing conflicts between the working class and the elite. Alright. Another thing here is that it attempts to reveal that the ultimate source of people's experience is the socio-economic system. Let's try to examine the work Cinderella. Marxism plays a major role here because the character, Cinderella, may be the main character, but setting up the character's consciousness toward his or her class, you can see that there is really differentiation and social struggle. Okay, so there was also a certain part wherein I think it was the Grand Duke who visited houses because they are looking for that woman who danced with the prince. So she was not allowed to enter the living room. She was locked in an attic. I think that was an attic because her stepsisters or her stepmother considers her as a scullery maid. Her social status is not on par with those of them. Okay, so you can see there the social status there. Alright? But also, you may have here Cinderella, you may also critique it using feminist criticism. But you have to look into certain angles there and which part of feminism really could be critically evaluated. Another one is we have the psychological criticism or also the psychoanalysis. So this one, it is really very interesting because here we try to focus and reflect on the effect that modern psychology has had upon both literature and literary criticism. For example, we have here the story by Edgar Allan Poe, Telltale Heart. Okay, so it includes here the psychological study of a particular artist, usually noting how an author's biographical circumstances affect or influence their motivations and or behavior. So if you know Edgar Allan Poe, you would notice that his works, his literary works, most of the time they are kind of dark or gothic in nature. So if you are going to analyze or evaluate his work, you might be able to use psychological criticism and relate it to the life of the author himself, Edgar Allan Poe. If you would be able to read his circumstances, his life, you would realize that perhaps it is also projected on his write-ups. Okay? And here, it also includes analysis of fictional characters using the language and methods of psychology. So it explains why did a character commit such act? What are his motivations? Is he experiencing some sort of mental conflicts or personal conflicts with himself that he was able to do this certain act? Okay, so psychological. And last on our list is eco-criticism. So from the word eco there, I think you'd be able to relate it to environment, ecology, nature. So it is the study of the relationship between literature and the physical environment. So it tackles the role of environment to the physical setting of the literary work and how nature is represented and how values are consistent with ecological wisdom. For example, there are already a number of films tackling about climate change, how important it is to talk about nature and take care of nature. So it could be critic through this approach, eco-criticism, and it takes an earth-centric approach to literary study. So earth-centric or geocentric rather, meaning it's earth-centered. So eco-criticism. So very simple. So to recall, critical approaches are various ways or standpoints by which we can analyze or evaluate a certain material. So again, we have formalism, feminism, reader response, Marxism, psychological criticism or psychoanalysis, and eco-criticism. There are still other critical approaches not mentioned here. We also have historical, postmodern, deconstruction, and so on. But we will just focus on these 6. So as mentioned earlier, we still follow a structure. Very simple. Still the essay 1, introduction, body and conclusion. For your introduction, again, you may throw here a question, present the situation. If you are writing an analysis about a certain novel or material, you need to introduce there the name of the novel, for example, or film, the name of the author. You also provide their thesis statement or your claim about what you've read. Then for the body, it is where you present your arguments based on the criteria presented. Then for the conclusion, it's like you try to tie together all the main ideas you presented in your paper. We have here steps in writing. Step 1 is we need to explore possible topics if you were not given a writing prompt or a writing assignment. The second one, we need to establish a criteria or standard for evaluation. So now we mentioned earlier that a critique paper, it must be objective. Okay, and when we say objective, it is not just something that we analyze based on our feelings, because again, it really requires critical thinking and critical reading. So we must have an established set of criteria. For example, if you will be asked to make a product review, you are going to, or you will later on decide to buy a new gadget or a laptop. So if you're going to, and then for example, you bought a laptop, you're going to write a review, you must have certain criteria, example criteria by which you can evaluate a laptop. It's the design, that is one. So you need to talk about the design in the body, evaluate it objectively. Another criterion is, aside from design, you may talk about the storage capacity of the laptop. So what about it? Another is the price. That is another criterion by which we can evaluate a computer. Okay? Another is like a TV show. How will we evaluate a TV show? Perhaps the audiovisual quality, the format, and the time slot. You can have those criteria. Another is, this is already the part where we examine our subject based on the criteria we set. We make a claim or judgment, and we need to organize our data and then formulate it into one essay. Alright, it's time for the recap. So reaction papers, reviews, and critiques are not simply summaries. Okay, they are not summaries. They are critical assessments or evaluations of different works based on criteria. One thing is just that reaction paper, according to Michano earlier, it is more subjective. However, they still require critical thinking skills and recognizing arguments. And then we also have different approaches to criticism, and they are standpoints in writing and evaluation. And based on the material, you might be able to appropriately select which one works best in your evaluation. It could be formalism if you want to talk about how the form, the imagery, the literary devices contribute into making it aesthetic. Aesthetic meaning beautiful. The second one is feminist, talks about gender and women in the society. We also have Marxist, socioeconomic status, reader response, meaning is created by the readers. We also have psychoanalysis, which is evaluation is made based on psychology, the workings of the mind. And lastly, eco-criticism pertaining to ecological wisdom. And lastly, one thing that I'd like you to remember, the word critique does not mean cynicism or pessimism. It's not always negative, because when, for example, when we write a critique paper, we also focus on the strength and the weakness of a certain material. So we try to evaluate objectively. So that would be all, and I hope that you've learned something today.